Yay! Okay, we have a fundraiser. Um, Please do consider donating. So, hi again, everybody. So basically, this live stream is going to be about talking and having an open conversation about this issue. I don't want to do most of the talking, so I've invited Tolu because I want to hear from black people about issues that affect them. I don't want to sit here and preach to you, not having lived through that and experienced that. And so I thought, right, I'm going to ask somebody that I know, who I know cares a lot about this issue and who I know can educate you guys a lot about this issue, to come on here and talk to me. So hopefully she's requested to go live with me. Yeah, she has. Here we go. Hopefully Tolly will come in, but please do consider donating. And hopefully, hey,
Hello.
amazing. I'm not entirely sure where to start with this, and I just want to take your direction on this whole thing really completely, and what you think is best to address, how you think is best to address it. Basically, yeah, exactly what you want to do. Hopefully a lot of people come and watch. So
Amazing. I think like the first thing to like establish is why people are now using their platforms more than they usually would. So earlier this week, a man called George Floyd was essentially murdered by a policeman. He had knelt on his neck for around 8 minutes, despite George crying that he couldn't breathe. And another black man in America has died. So a lot of uproar occurred in America, which is now spread throughout the world now, because it's gotten to the point where a lot of black people and other people worldwide are just sick and tired of targeted attacks and abuse against black people. And now we're realizing that because of how often this is occurring, we are now fed up with people simply just saying that they're racist. Like, there's more to it than that. Like, we now are asking the people to be more active with being against racism, because now being silent and being neutral is no longer enough. Like, it's no longer sufficient to just simply claim that you aren't racist if you're not actually doing things to show that you are against racism and that you support the Black Lives Matter movement. So we are just urging for people to use their platforms in any way they can, to donate in any way that they can, to sign petitions as often as possible, just so that we can see and that so we can understand that you are engaged within the movement that we are trying to do, to ensure we can see that everyone who is willing enough will be able to support us, because that's what we need right now. Because a lot of the times black people will continue to fight and say what they want to say out loud, but too many organizations and institutions will just shut our voices down immediately, and we're aware that we need the help of more groups. So we're just trying to come together to ensure that people will remember and understand and know inherently that black lives do matter, because it's something that should not be forgotten and it's something that should not be neglected. So
in
yeah.
terms of forgotten and neglected, obviously I do, with everything, with every single event that happens, there is always a surge of support on social media, people reposting Instagram stories, what have you. And while that is obviously fantastic to get the word out there, this problem is not going to go away overnight, and it's something that, you know, has existed for way beyond any of our lifetimes, way beyond. So I was just wondering what advice you have for people who are looking to start to be more active about this in their everyday life, how they can carry this forward and what they can do in their day-to-day life to keep that conversation going, even in times where it's not right, you know, all over every single news outlet in the world as the main story.
I think one thing that will help people engage more is to just be open and having discussions with your friends about race. A lot of the times when you yourself are not a person of color, you will find it like quite uncomfortable to talk about the oppression and the discrimination that people of color go through, especially black people. But the first step that you can take is to be more open in discourse, because that way you can learn from the people who have experienced this hardship in their lives and know what things you should and shouldn't be doing. So essentially, try and find a friend who is willing enough to have a conversation with you. Don't expect them to do so, because it's not the role of a black person to like teach you not to be racist. But if there is someone that you know who's willing to have that conversation with you, then do so. Learn from it. Read books. Read there are so many like books available that you can find for yourself and read through. Taking Up Space, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, Why All the Black People Sitting in a Cafeteria Alone, etc. Like, there are so many resources available that you yourself can try and look into to learn about all of these issues. There are so many shows on Netflix that you can sit down and watch and just see what situations that Black people in the past have undergone. One example, which I will tell you now, it's so upsetting to see, is When They See Us on Netflix. If you haven't seen it already, please go and watch it, because it just highlights the oppression and how much hardship certain Black men in the past have gone through. So it's a series about the Central Park Five and the backlash that they received for a crime that they didn't commit themselves. So definitely look into shows that are available, watch documentaries, etc., read articles, like literally go out of your way to find things that you can look from. And now that they're circulating, there are so many like threads and posts on Instagram that you can look through to see what resources are available. Just be open and be willing enough to want to have these conversations and pursue it and watch it, because that's how you can teach yourself and educate yourself on how to be a better peer or a better supporter for your friends.
Yeah, I've put a link on the live YouTube. There's links to a lot of different resources. I've spent today going through some of them, and I've been listening to the 1690 podcast by the New York Times, which is a really good introduction to people that perhaps don't know like anything about that sort of history. I studied at GCSE, but even I, thought I knew a lot about it, but you realise that you don't, and you've just scratched the surface. So I would definitely recommend that. And I think maybe if people could put recommendations of things in the comments of the live stream as well, of things that I think would be useful, because obviously like everyone would have had experiences. I want everyone to just sort of share and pool resources. It would be really good. And also, guys, donate, because it's a fundraiser for the Loveland Foundation, because I didn't realise that you could even do fundraisers on Instagram, so I'm really glad that you can. But it's basically a foundation who are focusing primarily on Black women and girls, but it's all about access, opportunity, prioritising all of these things. And thankfully, they were one of the charities that is linked with the Instagram capability to do this. Please do dip into your pocket and donate. Yeah, I don't know where to go from here. What else do you think is worth talking about?
I know there are a lot of my friends from uni who have started writing their own personal articles about issues that have occurred. So one thing that I also urge people to do is to look into articles like this and keep updated with the news. Also be aware when things are biased and decontextualized, because a lot of the times that can sort of sway the actual outlook of what has been occurring. So if you are looking into articles or looking into the news, make sure that you are aware of which particular news agents and like organizations will be biased, because they will definitely influence a lot of perceptions and views on issues. But just be diligent in what you're looking at and go from there. One thing that I just wanted to like be open about is Black people have always been like targeted and killed in America and all over the world as well. But one thing that I feel like people need to be aware of is that just because issues are more prevalent in America because they're filmed more often doesn't mean that it's not also happening in your own country. So in the UK, for example, we have an abundance of men and women who have been targeted and have been attacked for the colour of their skin. Stephen Lawrence, you've got Mark Duggan, and there are so many more examples, but because they're not reported enough, we're aware of it. So when you're looking into resources about people who have been a victim of racial attacks in America, do the same for the UK as well, or whatever country that you're from, because you can't necessarily complain about another location if the same like problem is where you're living in right now as well. So definitely like look into other aspects and into like other locations where these things are still also occurring. So that's just well,
definitely. I feel like the focus has obviously been on the US recently because of the fact that this case was, in the US. But I've seen a lot of videos on Twitter in the last 2 days that prove that similar things are happening here in the UK. And I think Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race talks about history of racism, and I've ordered it, so I'm hoping that it will come in the next few days. But the people who read that have said that that's a really good introduction to learn about it within the British context.
For sure. Again, so Will Smith recently quoted, like on his, I think it was his Instagram, that essentially racism isn't getting worse, it's just being filmed. So that's also something that I feel like a lot of people need to have in their minds when they're discussing topics about race, because just because you're seeing more deaths being reported on the news doesn't mean that that's like, it doesn't mean that that's just a new wave of issues that's been occurring. It's just that it's now being documented and reported more often. So the issue of race has been like a concern for centuries. Like, it's been so rooted into society that people sometimes forget where it initially began. So I think just to be aware of the history of racism itself, like you said previously, is very, very important, because understanding where it came from will allow you to sort of help to unravel it and sort of get rid of it completely. Because, like you said before, it won't necessarily be gone like at the snap of a finger. It's something that needs progress and continuous effort and continuous input so that we can resolve it. Because at the end of the day, we can't continue to live in a society where people are being targeted and attacked for the color of their own skin. Like, I don't want to be in a position where I have to potentially teach my children in the future that they have to be scared of an institution that's supposed to be protecting them. Like, that's not something that is fair. And it terrifies a lot of people, and in America especially, because of the use of weaponry, it just terrifies people completely. People also cannot say that the UK is less racist than America, because I feel like a lot of the times, a lot of people believe that if the UK had the same level of like equipment that America did, that the same issues that are happening in America will also still happen here. It's just because they are limited in the level of hatred that they can show outwardly with the limited resources that they have. So that's also something to be quite aware of. So the UK is not innocent. Like, don't believe it's innocent, because it's not. Like with the previous example, that it's also like very necessary to understand that the UK itself is not innocent, and more can still be done in this country. And again, look into researching it and going from there, because just being aware of all of it will help to support the Black Lives Matter movement, and ensure that we are heading in a direction that is beneficial for everyone, not just one particular race.
Definitely. We've raised over £200 already, which is fantastic. So if people have money to spare, obviously it's really difficult times for everyone at the moment, so I'm not, like trying to say you have to, but if you have got any money to spare, then it would be really cool if you guys could donate. And I'm pretty sure when you click to see like you're donating, you can read more about the foundation. But there are also so many different charities and things that you can donate to. I've put a big list of all of the resources, and what I'm going to do is save this live, upload it to my YouTube channel, keep it on there so that people can watch this, and put links to resources. So if you're watching this not while we're live, then go down below if you'd like to donate to either the Love Life Foundation or to another charity. Apart from donating though, what would you say would be some like the most productive thing that people can be doing apart from reading and stuff in sort of a day-to-day life? They're aware of the problems, and they're starting to read up and educate themselves in their spare time, but how in sort of like day-to-day existence can people be aware of privilege and actively be anti-racist rather than just saying that they're not racist?
I think one thing that's very important is to be able to condemn your friends and family who say particularly racist statements and things, because you can't call yourself anti-racist if you're not doing anything outwardly to prevent other people from encouraging racist discourse. So if you have someone that you know who for some reason has strong love for the N-word when they know they shouldn't be saying it, call them out on it and tell them that that's not necessarily, like, you're not entitled to be saying that word, you're not entitled to do anything in association with that word. If someone's commenting on a black friend of yours, then call them out for it, tell them to stop, because you can use your voice to prevent them from doing outright racist things, don't just stay in silence, because we need a defense regardless of whether or not a Black person is in the room or not. Like, you shouldn't feel the need to call out racism just because you have a Black person in the room. You should be doing it continuously with no what's that word, like, with no motive as well. Like, just do it because you know it's the right thing to do, rather than trying to gain something out of it. Like, just because someone is just because you feel like, oh, if you do something on social media and it makes you look like a white savior or a non-Black savior, or just like someone who's in, like, good, that's not necessarily the right thing, because you should be trying to support Black people without trying to gain attention from it in the wrong sense. So, like, don't be doing it for an ulterior motive. Do it because it's the right thing to do.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Somebody mentioned comments about talking about entrenched institutional system. I don't know if you wanted to maybe talk about that a little bit more, because I think that's something perhaps don't understand sometimes, and get sort of like throw the term around without really understanding what it means.
See, I don't want to say like too much on it, because I don't want to potentially say something wrong. Yeah. But the idea of institutionalized racism is not necessarily an outwardly view of racism, but rather an inherent part of a particular system or group that makes activities and events more difficult for Black people to be a part of, purely because of how it's built up. So, for example, this also refers to systematic racism, but a lot of times in, let's say, America, for example, their criminal and justice system is not necessarily in favor of the Black man or the Black woman. If a Black person were to do a particular crime, let's say they were in, I don't know, possession of a particular drug that isn't necessarily like a really major class A, class B drug or whatever, the sentences that they will receive is usually a lot worse than potentially their white counterparts or their non-Black counterparts, because regardless of the crimes that they commit, they will still end up seeing a more heavier sentence purely because of the color of it. And like, I can't necessarily say what factors will influence that, but it's just something that's a part of the system. There have been many occasions where, and I apologize for using like this as a scenario, so as a trigger warning, but in instances of rape, there have been Black men that have been jailed and sent to prison for people lying about them raping them, for example, whereas Brock Turner, the infamous rape trial, received a minimal sentence and was allowed to leave earlier, purely because he had a future for himself as a swimmer. He had a bright future. There was so much left for him, etc. But the same Black man who was accused of rape had his life completely ruined, and nothing went forward from there. So, like, it's just aspects within life where a Black person and a non-Black person can do the exact same thing, but the Black person will receive a worse punishment or worse treatment in terms of whatever they're going through. So I myself need to do more research on like the overall aspect of institutionalized racism and systematic racism, but it essentially is just referring to comparing two groups together and one getting a worse treatment for doing the exact same thing. So it's something that we can all look into and like educate ourselves furthermore, including myself. So it's something that like we can just try and see if we can pursue in the future.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's something that I learn more about, because sometimes I think there's a danger when you think of I saw the pyramid, where it's like you have the different, like, sort of more obvious and then more subtle, and there's also the idea of that there are literally systems in place that are inherently racist in themselves, and just the very existence of the system is disadvantaging people of color. So I think that would be so good if that was. I feel like I never learned anything about that at school. That was part of my like education system, really. You only ever learn it if you did history, and then that was obviously through a very, very narrow lens. So it's something that I have to make the content learn about ourselves. But we're nearly at £300, so that's really good. Somebody asked a very important question, actually. Somebody said, what can you do as a non-Black person of colour?
So like I said earlier, definitely look into resources such as books, and films, and having open discussions with people who may not necessarily be Black about racism, and using your voice to help create a change. Use your platforms to continue to promote and share petitions, donations, charity funds, etc., so that more people are aware of it. I know recently people have like been sharing on their stories like a passing on the chain sort of thing, and I'm not condemning anyone who's doing like that chain tag thing, but if you're not doing anything on top of that, then it's not really doing anything. So definitely try to actively do stuff. So like raising awareness, donating, sharing, signing petitions, helping your Black friends out is what is like the best thing that you can do in this situation, and to definitely understand what your privilege is. So look into aspects of life where you are essentially better off. So even if you may come from a working class background, or you may have struggled in life, I'm not saying that you I'm not saying that you aren't less advantaged, but in this instance, and like when we're focusing on race, it's usually Black people and other people of color who are at a disadvantage, because a lot of the times things within the system is not in our favor and it's often used against us. So just be aware of where in life you're privileged, and then use that privilege to help support your peers and lift them up in that way.
Definitely. I've seen a lot of people recommending The Hate U Give, and I would say I've read that book and it's absolutely fantastic, and I would definitely recommend it. And I also would recommend, I read this when I was in school. It's called Their Eyes Were Watching God, and I also thought that this was a really, really interesting insight as well. But please do keep putting your recommendations in the comments, because if somebody sees it and then they think, oh, that looks interesting, and then goes to read it, then you've done your bit to help show to help people. And we've made over £315, so that is really, really good, guys. Let's see if we can get to 500. If you've got anything to donate, that would be so fantastic. But yeah, back to you, Tolly. Like, what else do you think is important?
I earlier raised the point about why the All Lives Matter movement should not be a thing. Essentially, to explain what that is, the Black Lives Movement was established to help uplift and support the Black community during times of oppression and discrimination, etc. The All Lives Matter movement was created as a way to push the Black Lives Matter movement down. It was not necessarily used in a way to support the entire community, but rather to continue to shut Black people down. The Black Lives Matter movement is not saying that only Black Lives Matter. It's just saying that at this current moment in time, there are occasions in which our voices are not heard enough, and we want to be seen more so that we can talk about these issues and try and combat them. The All Lives Matter movement is essentially just telling the Black Lives Matter movement to shut up, and that is not right at all. There are many analogies that you can use to sort of explain why the All Lives Matter movement should like not be a thing. So I know one particular example is a bee example. So let's say you've got 5 kids in a row. One kid gets stung by a bee and you've got a plaster on hand. Which kid would you give the plaster to in terms of treatment? You'd give it to the kid who got stung by the bee, correct? So that kid who got stung represents a Black Lives Matter movement. The All Lives Matter movement essentially is saying that that plaster that you've got shouldn't be given to the kid with the bee sting. It should be given to some random kid who is completely fine purely because they're a kid. Like, I'm a kid, I should get that plaster too. That person who got stung doesn't need it at all. Whereas the person who's actually in pain and needs that form of treatment is not receiving it. So that's what the All Lives Matter movement represents, and that's just not necessarily fair to the Black Lives Matter movement, which is trying to end racism and uplift Black people. So that's just one analogy. There are other analogies available, like a house on fire sort of one, but it just helps to put in perspective why the All Lives Matter movement shuts things down. And I know you don't usually put a plaster on a bee sting, but just like as an analogy, that's just what you can sort of use to help visualize the difference between the Black Lives Matter movement and the All Lives Matter movement.
Definitely. I saw somebody recommend Hidden Figures. I also recommend it. It's not exactly, you know, it's not going to give you like in-depth knowledge, and you know, it is just it's a movie. Well, it's not fictional, it's based on a real story, but it's, you know, there's only so much they can talk about in 2 hours, but I would really recommend that movie. It's very, very Are there any other questions that you think we should address? My comment section is messing up a little bit, so
let's see. I know. Okay, I'm just gonna like use this person's question again because it's something that's like quite important to talk about. But what change do you think needs to be put into place into the UK's education system to teach younger generations about systematic racism? So in terms of the education system, a lot of curriculums are inherently based around the literature and work of particular white artists, white writers, white authors, etc. And people have tried to push for a need to diversify the curriculum and the syllabus by introducing people and their resources from Black sources or coloured sources, so that people have a better understanding of what it's like to be a person of colour, and the history of coloured people. Because a lot of times when it comes to like learning aspects of history or English or whatever, it's usually focused on white history rather than Black history, or that the only form of Black history that is taught is slavery. But there's more to being Black than just the history of slavery. There is so much culture to respect and understand and appreciate. There is so much heritage that can be taught to its students, but it's just not. So I know a lot of schools have tried to push to diversify the curriculum. I know my old school, for example, has tried to push for that. I know a lot of universities and students have been pushing for their department heads to be diversifying the curriculum and to introduce new perspectives to how they're teaching their students, because there's so much more to Black history than just slavery and oppression and discrimination. Like, it's necessary for people to be able to understand and appreciate why the Black culture is so incredible. Like, I'm biased because I'm Black, but like the Black history is definitely so credible, and it's necessary to understand and learn it, and to not necessarily continue to play into the whole slavery, oppression, discrimination card, because there's so much more to Black history than just those negative aspects. So yeah, essentially, I'm trying to see what else people are asking. But yeah, also a lot of Black history is kind of pushed aside. So a lot of genocides that have occurred in Africa, as a result of particular wars, have been neglected and ignored, that people should also be aware of. Like, even celebrating Black History Month in schools was the bare minimum because people just didn't want to embrace it. But I know a lot of people are now trying to better their schools in that way and ensure that people are really celebrating particular cultures and different cultures, because the world is diverse and we can't like neglect that. So it's really important to be able to celebrate and embrace everybody's cultures, including those of a Black background.
Yeah, that is so important. I think like anything school never had anything to do with culture. It was always to do with the history of oppression, which obviously is so important to learn. It's so important, but it's also important to have you learn so much about white culture. You never ever learn about the other side of it, and there's so many things in day-to-day life that, you know, like you wouldn't even know were elements of that culture because you've never been taught that that's where it has its roots. So for sure, like even recently there have been things that I hadn't known that was where it had its origins, and that's just testament to how shocking the British curriculum is. What do you think? Obviously, you know, like students are on a student level, it's very difficult to single-handedly change the curriculum, but was there anything that you sort of did in school that you found worked really well, or methods that people could use to try and start to push for change in their schools?
I think a lot of the times you can't necessarily like receive the whole outcome that you want by yourself. You need to have a sort of backing to help pursue the new things you're trying to establish within your schools or your universities. So one thing that I would really try and advise that people try to do is get the endorsement of a particular teacher, so that they can back you in whatever case that you're trying to do. So if there's a need to like add a particular book from a coloured author into your English curriculum, then talk to an English teacher about trying to pursue that, so they can help you raise an email, draft a letter in a way that's effective enough that the senior leadership team in your school or whatever will be more inclined and willing to look into it. Try and talk to other students and try and get their backing, get a an open letter, get as many people as possible to sign it so they can see how many people are passionate enough about wanting to initiate change, because one voice can only do so much, but having hundreds of voices and showing the importance of something by getting a group of people together will really sort of back your point up and help you out with getting the change that you want to get as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Strength in numbers, I suppose. Loud, you know what I mean? Like, join up with people, and there will be people that as well, like, share your cause. And like at my school, the teachers were always very on board if we came to them with a change that we wanted to push through. They would always be very helpful, and they'd allow us to bypass all the sort of like student mechanisms that you had to go through and leap right to the sort of like senior team leadership meetings, which was always really useful, because sometimes, you know, bureaucracy. No, is that what it is with the like when you have lots of papers and stuff? Yeah, bureaucracy like can be really, really just so many hoops to jump through. So yeah, I definitely agree with teachers. My teachers were always great with things like that.
I know in my school, in particular, there was like a really big issue concern with hair, which to other people may not seem very important, but a Black person's hair it's such an important aspect and factor of their life. Like, having protective styles on your hair is such a major part of growing up, and it's a great emphasis on a lot of Black girls' lives especially. So there would be complaints about Black girls having braids with a blonde strip, which people thought was a really silly issue to be concerned about. So there was a rule where you could only have hair with like one particular color in, and like doing braids, for example, takes a very long time. Like, you have to sit in for about 5 hours, 6 hours at a time, paying about 60-70 pounds to get your braids done, only for your teacher to then tell you that no, you've got to take them out. Like, first of all, no, are you going to pay me my money back for telling me to take out my braids? So I remember that a lot of students ended up trying to sign a petition to say that the treatment of this wasn't fair at all, because hair is such an important aspect of a lot of Black girls' histories, and it was something that they didn't want to have to take away or have stripped from them. So that was something that my old school tried to do, and now my old school sort of embraces the element of hair, so there are like very normal hair restrictions in my school, but that was a result of students fighting to show the teachers and the head teachers what was right and what shouldn't have been banned in school previously.
Oh no, you've frozen. Oh, go back. It's okay. I had a brief moment of like, no. Let's see if there are any more questions. We're almost at £400 as well, guys. So much. I literally didn't even expect us to raise that much. So that's fantastic.
I'm trying to see what else to talk about.
Yeah, I know.
But like, I guess if you guys have any particular questions or like concerns that you want addressed, then I can see if I can try and at least attempt to answer it without like being way too controversial. Actually, no, I'll be controversial. I'm not really fussed about that, because I can't really apologize for being Black, because that's who I am. So I know some people have been asking about reverse racism, for example, or only people of color experience racism. So to me, and like my understanding of it, is that if a system is built in your favor and it's built to uplift you, then essentially particular hate or statements people make against you won't be perceived as racist, because society is built to be in your favor. Whereas if you have someone where the system is built against them and is built in a way to oppress them and to not necessarily see them benefit and prosper, then remarks and statements and attacks against them will be perceived as racist, because essentially the system's not built in their favor and it's not there to benefit or favor them. So if you are a part of a group or a range of people where even if someone were to say something bad about you, but you can still favor from the system, then whatever has like occurred isn't necessarily perceived as racist, because it's not there to oppress you or discriminate you. It's just an unfortunate occasion. Whereas, I don't know, but kind of just there. It's all in relation to privilege and like someone, yeah. So it's in relation to privilege and power. So even if someone were to make a remark about you, if you still have privilege within society and it's still in your favor, then it's not really racist. Whereas if you don't have the privilege, so like for me, for example, in society, having black skin makes me less privileged. So having particular remarks said about me or having things said about me is racist, because I am not privileged and this society is not necessarily built to benefit black people.
Right, absolutely. A lot of people are saying why I'm answering questions, and the reason I'm not answering questions is because I've invited Tolu here to answer questions, because I'm not the one answering questions about things that, not that I don't necessarily, you know what I mean, as in like this, I want this to be a platform where Tolu can speak about her experiences and how it's impacted her, because it hasn't impacted me. I've never experienced racism. I never will experience racism. And so that is the precise reason why I'm answering questions. So if you do have questions, please do address them to Tolu, because that's why I invited her on here, because as you can tell, she's very well spoken, and I thought that we could all learn a lot from hearing her speak. So there's 393 of you here. So and somebody said, oh, it looks like my room is about to burn. There's just a candle like over. So my room isn't burning. You're all right.
So someone asked, how do we make sure it's still talked about in a week, month, year's time, not just a surge of temporary support? Now, this is something that I think is very important to discuss, because there are always waves of apparent support for the Black Lives Matter movement, and then it disappears once like a charge has been declared or something. But when you think about it properly, just because one surge has occurred doesn't mean that black people within the periods of those surges still aren't necessarily facing oppression and discrimination within their lives. Like, the issues that we go through are consistent, and doesn't occur in the surges that you see within the news media outlets. In order to continue discussions and ensuring that you are being actively against racism, continue to talk about these issues with your friend, be open in condemning people who have said things that are racist. Definitely use your privilege wherever you can to spread awareness. So even if someone hasn't been brutally murdered, still defend cases and things that are going on in the world. So for example, if you can see that your friend has been like picked on for the color of their skin or something that they have that's an inherent feature of a particular race, call the people who've been condemning that person out. Like, don't be silent. Use your voice and uplift people wherever that you can. Read books, continue to educate yourself, and look into insight on how you can continue to develop your understanding of why movements like the Black Lives Matter movement are so important. Show your black friends that you are there to support them, and make sure that they're aware that you are an ally within these situations and occurrences. Like, it doesn't have to be only when someone gets killed and it's spread around the news that you have to speak up. Do it continuously and do it without an ulterior motive.
Yeah, in terms of ulterior motive, I know that a lot of people, I'm not trying to say that everyone's got an ulterior motive. A lot of people are sharing posts and resources on social media, which is fantastic because it does get the word out there. But at the same time, there's a limit to what you can achieve with your Instagram stories. I think when this sort of like dies down as being the sort of main story, if that makes sense, then I think, you know, there is stuff that we can be doing that, yeah, okay, you might not necessarily be posting it on social media, but it's things that you can be doing in your everyday that you don't need to shout about, that you know that you are actively trying to be anti in your life, like checking yourself, checking other people. Just, you don't always need to, you know, obviously have resources and things like that is so key. But as Holly was saying, like, there does run a risk of you looking like you get praise for doing it. So that's why I wanted to talk about it openly on here, so people can know that there are other ways to be doing things rather than just reposting on Instagram thinking, okay, cool, sorted, because it's not sorted. Yeah. Well, that's quite a good one. I don't know if you wanted to mention that, university and racism, and how your experience at Oxford's been.
So for me, in terms of sort of embracing my blackness, the ACS, so the Afro-Caribbean Society, has been one that has really allowed me to settle in and really accept who I am, because it's a society where I'm surrounded by people who are just like me, who are outspoken and willing to tackle situations and occurrences that won't necessarily be in support of Black people. So there are so many people within that society who are so outspoken and vocal and will literally shut down instances that shouldn't have happened because it's not in favor of an entire community. So for example, my good friend, I don't know if she wants me to name drop her, but one society in particular wanted to have an event with a particular I think it was I don't even know what position she has, but just someone who had quite a large position of power, but because of her history and her role within the Windrush scandal, it wasn't necessarily perceived that the person to be invited, like it wasn't shown that if her presence was there, that it would benefit multiple communities, but rather just focus on one. So making it highlighting how bringing, I'm not even speaking properly, but just people using their voices to show that it's better to have people invited who are going to be representative of everyone and embrace everyone's qualities rather than just nitpicking on one particular niche group to show equity and equality, because that's so important. And there are so many people within the ACS who are so willing to fight for what's right, and I just love that about them. There are so many people, like just individual people in general, who are doing things to try and make a change, whether it's small, whether it's large, just because they know that they can try and uplift their Black brothers and sisters within the university. So for me, for example, I am trying to see if I could do something about how medicine is taught, because a lot of the times people don't realize that a lot of examples that we're taught from are white examples. So when it comes to learning about skin conditions, for example, the examples that we are guided to are of white patients. But what happens if a coloured patient comes to the ward and I can't recognise a particular condition of their skin because I wasn't taught about that? All of these aspects will come into play. So just being able to offer a different perspective to people within their departments would be really helpful, so that they can see what things that they can change and develop it from there. So just giving insight into what things are like from our perspective within university is helpful, because we can't necessarily improve and bring about change if we aren't necessarily being vocal about it ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not really sure. There seems to be I think it's talking about the term people of colour, whether that's a PC term, whether that's the right term to be using.
I personally don't like the term person of colour, because I feel like people who are from different backgrounds, why do they all need to be grouped into one homogenous mass? I am Black, I have Asian friends, I have friends of other ethnic backgrounds. Why must it be that the people who are not white should all be grouped into one specific class? Why can't we be individualized and be represented and embraced for our different backgrounds? Why must we be grouped into one section? It just doesn't make sense. So for example, a lot of the times people tend to hide particular issues behind the bless you, the issues within the Black people within the POC term. However, the issues that Black people face are not going to be the same as Asian people or other minority ethnic groups. So just by grouping all of them into one group doesn't necessarily highlight the injustice that they face. So I think it's so important to be able to individualize these different groups, because we are different people. I'm not Asian, I am Black, so it's important to note that I am that particular racial group and to go from there. And the same with the term BAME. BAME and POC, I just don't really vibe with it, because I'm Black. I'm not I'm within the group, but as an individual I am Black. I'm not it just needs to be separated and distinguished, so people can really appreciate the different groups for who they are, because you won't see white people being grouped within those classes. So why is it that we have white and then BAME? Why can't it not just be white, Black, Asian, minority ethnic? Why can't we all be separated? It just, yeah, I just don't like the terms POC and BAME in particular. I'd rather be called what I am, which is Black, and go from there.
Absolutely, everyone's definitely agreeing with you, and I do as well. Is that if in that, it's still an us and them, if you know what I mean, because you've got white and then you've still got all.
It needs to segregate people, and there's no need for that whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly. We're nearly at £500, guys. If anyone would like to tip us over to the £500 mark, that would be fantastic, because we have 10 minutes, and that would be so cool if anyone has spare a little bit of change.
We need £4.20 left.
£4.20. That is the price of an overpriced coffee at Starbucks that you're not having at the moment because we're in lockdown. But instead of having your iced latte, which, I mean, I did have one the other day, to be honest, because if your Starbucks hasn't reopened, then
let's see.
Yay, we hit it.
Oh yay, thank you for 500. That is amazing. What else? I think, like, how much time do we have left?
We have 10 minutes until it will automatically cut off, so.
Okay, so I feel like this question is one that should definitely be answered. But what is the difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation? So the term cultural appropriation refers to when particular people who are not of a certain like racial group or ethnicity or background use those features and those traits to sort of capitalize and show off for their own personal benefit. So one example. Ooh, okay. So
sorry, no, carry on. I'm just charging my phone. It's about to die. So.
One example that I can use in particular are, like I said before, braids. So braids are a hairstyle that many Black women use to sort of maintain their hair. It's a protective hairstyle that they use because, like, I can't always keep my hair out like this. I need to have braids and to protect it sometimes and to keep it growing and keep it safe. So there's like a particular reason and a cause that us Black women use braids for. However, there have been many influencers and celebrities who have used these hairstyles and have now tried to reinvent them as things that they created themselves and have completely ignored and neglected the true history of the things that they've now claimed for themselves. So boxer braids are not boxer braids. They're cane rows / cornrows. They began as a part of African history. They were used to help guide people along the underground routes during slavery. They were used to help store rice grains when people were going on long treks to keep them safe and protected. However, people have now tried to reclaim that heritage for themselves and claimed it to be theirs when it's literally not theirs at all. And so many celebrities and influencers have fed off of it, and it's not benefited the group where it began initially. So another way to sort of like develop that is, if I were to have braids or cane rows initially, I'd be mocked, I'd be ridiculed, I'd be made fun of. But why is it when a celebrity or an influencer does it, it's okay, it's fashionable, it's a trend? Like, it just doesn't make sense, and it's so disrespectful to the group where it came from because it just doesn't uplift them in the way that they should be. So appropriation is taking something from another person's legacy and history, claiming it as your own, and not even giving appreciation or crediting the person that you've essentially taken this thing from. Cultural appreciation is still associating and using another person's sort of like legacy or idea, but using it to support that group and to show appreciation and awareness for it. An example that I can use is, I think there are many pictures of like Angelina Jolie going to particular Asian and Muslim countries and her wearing a hijab or a headdress as a form of respect because that's what's necessary within those communities, not to try and hide the heritage and the legacy of the headdress, but to respect the place that she's going to. So cultural appreciation is using these aspects, but doing it to uplift and benefit and show appreciation to the cause that it came from initially. And a lot of influencers and celebs tend to neglect that because they don't realize the true heritage of particular things that they've claimed for themselves. So appreciation is really showing respect and appreciation for whatever like issue or thing that you've claimed for yourself or like started using, and crediting those people that started what you're trying to copy or use within your own lives as well. But yeah.
Maybe we should have one more question, do you think? I think probably time for one more.
Okay, let's see. Oh yes, knowledge is very much power.
Knowledge is power. That's why we're doing this live stream.
I don't know, like, if there are...
Yeah, do you reckon there's any more questions?
I think that's kind of like the general gist of everything. But
I think so, yeah.
If anyone has like further questions, they can just look into it online, read books, look at the resources that are available, and educate themselves a bit further.
I just want to say, Tolly, thank you so much for taking an hour out of your time to come on here, because I know that, you know, a lot of people are very clear that, you know, you should be doing the work to educate yourself, and that you shouldn't just be asking Black people to do it for you. But I'm so glad that you've come on here, because I think that sometimes hearing it directly from people that know most about it, have experienced it, can be a really good springboard for people to go off and like inspire them to start to do other things. So on behalf of all 400 people watching, like, thank you so much for coming on here. And I will definitely save this live, because I've learnt loads. I'm sure everyone else has learnt loads as well. And we've raised over £500 too. So
thank you so much to everyone who donated as well, but still continue to do things actively to show your support to the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah, absolutely. I will put all of the resources that I've found on the description of the YouTube video, which I'll leave up, so it will just be there whenever you need it. It will just be a reference bank. There's like really good YouTube videos that I found, podcasts, articles, whatever. So definitely go and check that out. If you're watching this on YouTube and you've sat all the way through it, thank you. And also don't forget that you can also donate to other platforms, which will also be linked below. And yeah, I think that is actually everything. I'm really grateful for you for coming, and I'm grateful for everyone who's watching as well. So I hope that people have found it useful. I definitely have. But yeah, I think, yeah,
that's it. Nice little end off, and like glad to have answered people's questions and to clarify certain issues.
Yeah, this has been really great. So thank you. And I guess I have to say goodbye now. I suppose if I press end, does it end for both of us, right?
I think so. But yeah, thank you for having me as well, and letting me be on your platform.
No, thank you. Literally, thank you. Like, there's 400 people here, and hopefully a lot more people will watch it on YouTube as well. So yes, fantastic. And yeah, that's everything. I don't know how to end this other than to say goodbye, everybody, and go educate yourselves further. And yeah, we'll see you very soon.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Bye.